How can a global power lose its dominance on the world stage? For France, a nation defined by its history, diplomatic weight, and military might, this is no longer a theoretical question. Deep crises have been unfolding. Its leadership in Europe, its strategic partnerships, and its own domestic stability are now in question. The erosion of French power burst into view in the African Sahel. There, a wave of anti-French sentiment fueled a series of military coups, forcing nations once considered unshakable allies to expel French troops and cut ties with Paris. But this was only the first, most visible domino to fall. The collapse of its influence in Africa is only the beginning of the story, revealing deeper fractures much closer to home. For centuries, France stood as a pillar of the international order. Now, what follows is a breakdown of how that pillar begins to crumble. If you're interested in learning more about what happens beyond the headlines, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because in our world, every move matters. Even after decolonization, France never truly left Africa. Over decades, it built a Françafrique, a complex network of economic leverage, murky relationships with African elites, and military backing that ensured Paris's influence and unrestricted access to resources and markets. One of Françafrique's central pillars has been the CFA franc, the currency used by 14 African nations. The CFA is split between the West African CFA, used by 8 countries, and the Central African CFA, used by 6, and both currencies are pegged to the euro. By default, the fixed exchange rate system provides monetary stability by constraining inflation, but it also represents the continuity of Paris's colonial legacy. It denies member countries control over their own monetary policy, meaning they cannot set their own interest rates or devalue currency to boost exports, a critical tool for economies reliant on raw commodity exports. And until 2020, all CFA franc nations were required to deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves with the French treasury. Essentially, this was a tax on their sovereignty, and still is for some because this practice still applies to the Central African CFA nations of Cameroon, Chad, the Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, and the Republic of the Congo. Moreover, in the Françafrique scheme, France provides political and military backing to the ruling African leaders, and in return, major French corporations like TotalEnergies, Orano, and Bolloré Group secured lucrative, one-sided deals that transformed the economies of former colonies into raw material suppliers for France's industrial needs. In practice, this meant exclusive concessions with minimal tax obligations and royalty payments, all while operating under a veil of financial opacity and the assurance of French political backing for cooperative local elites. This system, which enriched a select few while providing minimal benefits to the local population, created deep-seated grievances that eventually fueled a dramatic backlash. And the wave of military coups across the Sahel has shattered the old order. In Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the new military juntas have explicitly rejected Paris, forcing the withdrawal of French troops and creating a power vacuum eagerly filled by the Russians, particularly through the Wagner Group. And this isn't just rhetoric. In September 2023, these 3 nations formed the Alliance of Sahel States, a neutral defense pact aimed at countering French and Western influence. By January 2024, they had formally withdrawn from the West African bloc ECOWAS, cementing a new pro-Russian axis in the heart of the African continent. For France, the consequences are severe. Its political standing is in tatters. Its soft power has been eroded by a youth-driven anti-colonial narrative, and its economic interests are under threat. Facing the loss of critical uranium supply from Niger, Paris has now been forced to pivot to new partners. In a clear sign of that strategic shift, French nuclear giant Orano has signed major agreements with Uzbekistan and Mongolia to expand uranium exploration, a stark admission that its African sphere of influence is no longer secure. The gradual collapse of the decades-old Françafrique system we see today is the most direct challenge to France's global standing. But as France's post-colonial authority crumbled, a new crisis of influence was developing much closer to home. The war in Ukraine has fundamentally reshaped European security, and in doing so has exposed the limits of the French leadership. For years, President Macron has championed the concept of strategic autonomy, envisioning a Europe capable of defending itself without heavy reliance on the United States. However, the war has shifted Europe's geopolitical center of gravity eastward, empowering nations that view American security guarantees as non-negotiable. The most significant challenge to France's military leadership in Europe comes not from an adversary, but from its traditional partner, Germany. Berlin's announcement of the creation of a €100 billion fund to modernize its military has altered the balance of power. A prime example of France's diminished influence is the European Sky Shield initiative. Spearheaded by Germany in late 2022, this project aims to create a unified European air and missile defense system by jointly purchasing off-the-shelf equipment, primarily American Patriot and Israeli Arrow 3 systems. And France has refused to join. Paris argues the initiative undermines European autonomy by favoring non-European technologies over its own French systems. But its objections have been largely ignored. As of this report, 24 European nations, including the UK, the Nordics, and most of Eastern Europe, have joined the European Sky Shield initiative, effectively isolating Paris and sidelining French defense industries. Such strategic isolation is not a new phenomenon. A similar blow occurred in 2021 with the collapse of a landmark €56 billion submarine deal with Australia, which was cancelled in favor of the AUKUS security pact with the US and the UK. It was a profound strategic setback for Paris, signaling that even key partners were prioritizing the Anglo-American security axis over French-led initiatives. These events highlight a growing rift. While France pushes for long-term, homegrown European defense projects, the immediate security concerns of frontline states in Eastern Europe have made them prioritize NATO interoperable systems from the US. The Franco-German engine, once the driving force of European integration, has stalled over fundamental disagreements on defense, energy, and fiscal policy, leaving France's grand strategic vision and its ambition to be Europe's undisputed leader with very few committed followers. France's long-standing posture is to act as a puissance d'équilibre, or a balancing power. Yet, this is being tested by today's multipolar world order. This traditional third-path diplomacy is proving difficult to sustain in an era that is defined by hardening alliances and the rise of new players. The stage where Paris once played a leading role has become increasingly crowded by countries pursuing their own distinct geopolitical interests. The central challenge remains navigating the escalating tensions between the United States and China, and here France is walking a precarious tightrope. Paris attempts to engage Beijing as a vital economic partner while confronting it as a strategic competitor. On one hand, major French corporations in sectors like aerospace and luxury goods are deeply dependent on the Chinese market. On the other, Paris has redefined itself as an Indo-Pacific power, increasing its naval presence in the South China Sea through freedom of navigation operations, designed to contest Beijing's territorial claims. This dual approach satisfies no one. As Washington adopts a more confrontational stance, Paris's nuanced position is often viewed with suspicion by the Americans, while its maneuvers in Asia fail to grant it any significant leverage over Beijing. Moreover, French influence is increasingly contested by assertive middle powers that are expanding their own footprints. Turkey, for instance, has expanded its military and economic presence in Libya, often directly undermining French interests. Similarly, financially powerful Gulf states are building new partnerships across Africa, often alternative to traditional European ties. In response, Paris seeks to build strategic partnerships with nations like India to counterbalance these rising powers and secure its interests. Ultimately, though, France finds itself overstretched, unable to gain from the US-China rivalry, challenged by rising ambitious powers, and increasingly disconnected from the security priorities of its own European allies. But perhaps the greatest challenge to France's global standing lies not abroad, but within itself. A nation's ability to project power internationally is directly linked to its domestic stability and economic strength, and France is facing turmoil on all fronts. The current political landscape in Paris has been marked by deep polarization and instability. Since failing to secure an absolute majority in the 2022 legislative elections, President Macron's government has struggled to build stable coalitions. It has frequently resorted to a controversial constitutional provision to pass key legislations without a final vote, most notably for the 2023 pension reforms, which triggered mass protests and strikes across the country. The political volatility has reached its peak in 2024, with the early dissolution of the French National Assembly and 4 different prime ministers, reflecting a state of near constant gridlock. This exhausts political capital and projects an image of an unreliable and weak nation. France's political disorder is compounded by significant economic challenges. French public debt has surged to over 110% of GDP, limiting the state's room for maneuver on both domestic and international fronts. The fiscal crisis is exacerbated by the same political infighting that has rendered the government unable to adopt any meaningful policy response. The struggle for political survival at home further distracts the government from foreign policy priorities. Yes, France retains significant assets, including a professional military, a global diplomatic network, and still a considerable soft power. But its capacity to leverage them has been fundamentally undermined by its own internal divisions. A nation that cannot lead itself cannot expect to lead the world, because ultimately, even Achilles was only as strong as his heel. This, it's just geopolitics. Is this the inevitable decline of a great power or the difficult emergence of a new French identity? And if you want to learn more about politics and international affairs, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.